What is an archetype? The dictionary definition sucks, so let's take a quick look at some ideas that can help us understand the concept properly. For now, just think of an archetype as a pattern. We'll figure out what kind of pattern in a second. See, reality is complex. Actually, it's crazy complex. Our ways of describing it even now are pretty ineffective. So our ancestors had to understand this crazy, complex existence with a way more limited tool set than we have now. They didn't have science or facts. They mostly had sticks and fire. One of the tools they used to understand their existence was to tell stories. And from these stories, archetypes emerged. Archetypes are ancient patterns, maybe even our earliest patterns. Our ancestors left them for us in stories to help their children, and eventually us, understand this complex reality. The crazy part is, some of them probably didn't even know they were doing it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. All archetypal patterns have two very specific qualities. They exist across different cultures in different eras of human history. Most of these cultures had no communication with one another, but they did share archetypes. How is this possible? Well, let's look at two examples to find out. The first archetype we'll look at is the wise old man archetype. The wise old man exists in many, if not most, hero stories, guiding the hero and helping him to do things that he would be pathetically incapable of doing on his own. Like, for example, stepping outside. The wise old man model exists in Greek, Roman, Russian, German, Indian, Native American, African, and many other cultures, myths, and stories. But many of these cultures had no contact whatsoever, and on top of that, some of them are separated by thousands of years. So how is it possible that the wise old man archetype or pattern got there in the first place? The depth psychologist Carl Jung believed that it was a result of what he called the collective unconscious. He believed that man shared this kind of deep unconscious sort of hive mind that linked us all as human. This might seem quite mystical and fabulous, but actually it makes a lot of sense if you break it down. Let's look at our second example to understand how this might be possible. The second example is the archetype of petrification, specifically, for our purposes, by beasts. Petrification is just a fancy way of saying being turned into stone. When I say beast that turns men to stone, what do you think of first? The Medusa? The basilisk? A cockatrice? Well, there's dozens of mythical beasts that have had this power. Why is it that these magical creatures turn men to stone when they're looked upon? And remember, most of these creatures come from completely different countries and time periods. Well, to understand why this archetype might exist, we need to look at some evolutionary psychology. When you come face to face with a deadly animal, a bear for example, what are your options? You can flee or you can fight, but your very first instinct is to freeze. You need a second to assess the situation, so you stand perfectly still. So what was the answer for our ancient predecessors when confronting a deadly creature?
Don't move! Can't see us if we don't move.
Don't move. Be a statue. Then they figured out what to do next. So now we see that the concept of deadly animals and stone can be related symbolically from an evolutionary point of view, and then we can ask, how did our ancestors communicate this? Well, like I said earlier, through story. It's kind of a lesson for future generations, but it's more than that. It's how our forebears conceptualized their complex existence. See, the collective unconscious isn't so crazy after all. It's actually quite logical. We all share a common ancestry, and with this common ancestry comes an ancient set of primitive patterns of behavior. Ways of conceptualizing the complexity of reality. Through story, through myth, through archetype. Their survival depended on transmitting this and many other archetypes as effectively as possible. This happened over the course of our evolution, which is a long, long period of time. So, what is an archetype? Now we're ready for the proper definition. And a powerful one comes courtesy of University of Toronto professor Dr. Jordan Peterson, who said, most fundamentally, an archetype is a behavioral pattern and the reflection of that behavior in a story. So the next time you're reading a story, look for a pattern and ask yourself, what human behavior is this reflecting? Maybe you'll learn something about yourself and about humanity.